I love cooking and I love teaching people how to cook. I've been doing both for 30 years. To cook well, it helps if you love and value food, as that's where it all starts. My approach to cooking is simple and not new. Use the best ingredients you can get organized, and follow the recipe. And that way, you'll be sure to get really wonderful results. When you're making something with pastry, always read over the pastry section of the recipe a couple of times before starting so that you have the different stages in your head. Making the pastry takes only a matter of minutes, and the vital thing to remember with shortcrust pastry is, of course, not to overhandle it. The starter I'm making today is a Pissaladiere, a flat Provençal onion tart with a very distinctive lattice of anchovy on top. I'll give it a twist with a little roast pepper and rosemary. And this tart definitely best served with a salad of organic leaves. So I'm going to get my onions on cooking for the Pissaladiere. They take between 30 and 40 minutes. I've got lovely sliced red onions and I've little garlic and rosemary. This is a Provençal dish, of course, so olive oil is the perfect medium for sweating the onions. So 4 tablespoons. Let that just warm up a little bit before you put in your onions. Less chance of them sticking when you do that. And I've got some very thinly sliced garlic as well, which will add a little sort of piquancy to the onions. My olive oil is hot enough now. You can hear the onions just starting to sizzle. It's a tight fit, but the onions, of course, are going to collapse completely. I've got beautiful rosemary here, which is actually in flower. And what will happen here is most of the little rosemary pins, as they're called, or needles, will fall off of the stalk in the cooking. So then I'll be able to pull out the tough stalk, because you certainly don't want to eat those. So actually, I'll give my onions a little turn first. Try and get them coated in the fat. I'm going to put in a little greaseproof or parchment paper or a butter wrapper between the onions and the saucepan lid to create the necessary steam. So I'll break that up like that, push it right down to the onions. Already the colours are really quite beautiful there, actually. Push it right down, tight-fitting lid, and then turn the heat down very low. So steam is going to build up in the saucepan, and that is what's going to prevent the onions from catching and burning. Okay, while they're cooking away, now I can make my pastry. Shortcrust pastry, measure your ingredients accurately. So I've got my flour, my butter, and my eggs to bind the pastry together. You can make this in a food processor if you wish. I like to make it by hand. So we start off by rubbing the butter into the flour, as the expression goes. So lumps of butter, not quite fridge cold, but not soft as if they've been at room temperature for half an hour or so. So still a little bit of firmness. And you simply rub the butter between your fingers, between your sort of thumb and your forefingers there like that. Gradually, it rubs in to really what you're after is a crumb. And in this case, a fairly fine crumb. The shortness of the pastry, as it's called, is determined by the quantity of butter you use. So the more butter you use, the shorter the pastry is. So I'm using half butter to flour in this particular recipe. So that's looking like sand, really, rather than dust. To bind these two relatively dry ingredients, egg. So I've got some beaten egg here. Put in slightly less than you think you need. Some people like to use a fork at this stage to get the pastry going like that. At this point, I like to get my hands in, just so as I am completely in touch with the texture. If it's too soft, it will lose its shape in the cooking and it can be tougher. If it's too dry, it's impossible to shape it. I'm going to use a fraction more egg. So you can see if I shot all of that large egg in the beginning, I would probably have a pastry that's too soft now. So it should come together at this point without too much difficulty. I like to put it out on my work surface. I think you can overstate how gentle you need to be with shortcrust pastry. And certainly the first few times when you make it, you'll possibly be a little bit more heavy-handed than you will 3 or 4 times down the road. And that looks pretty nice. I'm very happy with that. Now, what's really important at this stage is to chill the pastry. Because if you try to roll this now, you've activated the gluten in the making, and if you chill it, the gluten relaxes again, and it's much easier to roll it. So, a plastic bag, greaseproof or parchment paper, just fold it up, cover it, and into your fridge for half an hour minimum. What I like to do is to take whatever tin I'm using and use it vaguely as a template for the sides of the pastry I'm now about to roll. I tend to roll to the edge, but never out over the edge because it makes the pastry a bit thin and more difficult to handle. And I'm rolling it to a size that's slightly larger than I want. That means I can make myself a nice sort of neat edge and trim off some of the excess. Roll the pastry over your rolling pin. Take your time. Think Swiss roll. Like that. Pop in your tart tin. Then just drape it in like that. Take my knife and just cut along the edge. Use your fingers to neaten up the edges, and I like to push the pastry into the base of the tin where the bottom of the tin meets the sides. And that's that. And then chill this again for half an hour before you put your onions and your filling on. So if I put this into the oven straight away to cook, it will shrink back. But by putting it into the fridge to chill, it relaxes the gluten. Then when it goes into the oven, it's more likely to hold a good shape like this. Okay, so the onions have cooked for 30 minutes with the lid on. Then I took the lid off to sort of cook some of the juice off the onions. And they've reduced down to this like a sort of an onion sort of pulp. And as you can see, some of the leaves, the little rosemary pins, as I call them, have fallen off. So take that out of there now, because clearly nobody's going to want to eat that. And the onions go a rather strange colour, but that's fine. That's what red onions do when you cook them slowly without any wine or anything for a while. But they're really perfect. So I've got the chilled pastry, and I can go ahead and assemble. Spread all of the onions out onto the tart. I've got some roast red pepper, which I've peeled, removed the seeds, and cut into little strips. And then to start, a little lettuce. And the red immediately improves the colour. You could use yellow peppers as well if you wanted to, but I don't find that green peppers are really any good for this. And then when you start to go in the other direction, hopefully the lettuce starts to make sense. And then I'm going to lay the anchovy on top of the pepper. And I've cut them in half lengthways, so nobody's going to get too much anchovy in one place. And lay the anchovy strip down on top of the lovely sweet pepper. Sweetness and saltiness in the same mouthful. Some people like to dot an individual whole olive in all of the little gaps that you've created by the lattice pattern. And that is ready to go straight into the oven. I'm going to cook that until the pastry is nice and crispy. Onions will start to bubble up again. The anchovy and the pepper sort of blend together in a slightly more obvious way. And then we're ready to eat. Okay, that's looking really nice. It gets sort of dark, sort of brooding colours, which suggests to you about the strong flavours, which is exactly what it's supposed to have. So at this point, I'm going to use some of the rosemary that's in flour. Lovely smoky flavour, and that's also an indication to everybody that there is rosemary inside. Why don't I just put that in there? I like to serve this with a salad of leaves. And I have a little vinaigrette, which I've made with 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 tablespoon of balsamic vinegar, and then a pinch of salt. So a little bit less than I think I need. A little toss, so they just get lightly glazed. And then the other thing I love to serve with this are some olives. So strong, oniony, sweet pepper, salty anchovy, briny olives, refreshing salad leaves, very savoury, perfect lunch, supper, lovely. When cooking fish, it is essential that it is absolutely fresh. Not only are the taste and texture better, fresh fish is easier to cook. The sweet and nutty and lemony flavour of lightly roasted cumin pairs beautifully with the fish and the light butter sauce in the next recipe. A simple butter sauce is a really useful one and can be used in many different dishes. The flavours can be varied as often as there are weeks in the year, and it is well worth mastering, and when you get to make it with confidence, you will find it invaluable. Chopped herbs, appropriate to what you are serving it with, can be added at the last moment to give you myriad variations. So I need to prepare my fish for grilling. The first thing to do is put your grill pan on. Lovely heavy cast iron grill pan. It could be a frying pan for that matter. Either way, the technique is exactly the same. So I've got a really beautiful piece of fresh hake. It's a lovely firm textured white fish that gets whiter as you cook it. It's really one of my favourite fish. And I'm going to start off by just dipping it in a little seasoned flour. That's flour that's got some salt and pepper in. So flesh side down, skin side. You could use gluten-free flour here if you want to. Then shake off the excess. Then the seasoning here is going to be salt and pepper, which is in the flour, and also some roasted cumin seed. To get the cumin to stick to the floured fish, I need to use a little bit of olive oil. You could use butter here as well if you want to. So just brush the olive oil on generously, but not over generously. Also, just paint a little olive oil on the base of your fish, just to make sure there's no possibility of leaving the skin on the pan when it's cooked. Now, sprinkle on some of the cumin. You could replace cumin seed with coriander here. So it's really important that your grill pan is hot enough. So I just hold my hand there and I can feel a good bit of heat. The other way to test is I just dip the fish onto the side of the pan and you can hear the sizzle, and then I know it's ready to go. So pop that on. We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. While that's grilling, I'm going to make the sauce to serve with the fish. So I'm making a simple butter sauce here, and I'm making a tomato and coriander simple sauce. So I've got some tomatoes which I've peeled, and I want to make what's called tomato concasse, and that sounds a bit sort of posh and restauranty, but you know, don't worry about it. It's fairly straightforward. I quarter the tomatoes, then just cut out the core, and scrape out as many of the seeds, and your tomatoes should be as ripe as they can be and as firm as they can be. So to peel them, I just pour boiling water over them for 10 seconds and the skin lifts off nice and easily. Then cut them into little strips and then into dice. And also, what's very important is that I season the tomatoes. So that's the tomato dice, concasse, whatever you want to call it. So a pinch of salt, like that. A tiny pinch of sugar. Now, when I say a tiny pinch of sugar, I mean a really tiny pinch. Look how little sugar is on my finger there. And a little black pepper. And then just mix that through, and that's going to go into the sauce in a moment. The sauce itself is unusual. Cold water to start with. Bring that water up to a simmer. Whisk in my butter a couple of knobs at a time. Keep your heat quite low. I just want it sort of simmering gently. Keep adding the butter, a few little knobs at a time, whisking continuously. I like to whisk it well at the last minute. Just got to get sort of nice and frothy. Add in the tomato. Swirl in the tomato rather than whisking it, because you don't want to break up the lovely tomato. And then a pinch of coriander, like that. Swirl that in, and that looks lovely. I'll taste that in a moment. Now I need to look at my fish. See the way it looks as if it wants to lift away? Pop it over. Lovely. Now, this vegetable, Tuscan kale, any of the kale families will do here. What they all have in common is that later on in their growing stage, what they do is they throw out new shoots, so they start to go to flower. And this is often the stage when gardeners throw them out. They are fantastic at this stage. To cook a green vegetable as normal, boiling salted water. So generously, but not over salted. Just enough salt to bring the flavour out. Then kale, I'm just doing enough for my one portion, so I'm going to pop it in like that. This one even has little flowers on it, which I'm totally happy about. Okay? And always, and I know I'm like a broken record about this, but with green vegetables, no lid, okay, because that will take the colour out of them. Now, our fish is cooked, as you can see, looking lovely and creamy, looking not translucent. So lift that off. Lovely. It left a tiny bit of the skin behind, not the end of the world. That looks really beautiful. See, the colour of the hake is really, really, really perfect. Okay, then a little of our sauce. I'm going to taste the sauce just to check and see if it needs any further seasoning. And this sauce will keep happily for an hour once you've made it. Just turn off the heat and keep it somewhere warm. You can even, believe it or not, reheat it very, very gently on a very low heat. Yeah, the flavour is really delicious. So, I mean, if you didn't have a green vegetable with this, you could just actually have the hake just as it is, like this. But I love a green vegetable just to lighten up the experience and to get a fully balanced plate of food. I tend to put the sauce around mainly like that. You could put the tiniest little dribble on top, but I don't want to moisten the top of the fish because it's become nice and crispy with the cumin. Now, this kale takes a very short time to cook. Looking lovely. Just lift it out. And I'm going to dress this very simply. You don't need to give it further dressing if you don't want to. Just make sure there's no extra water going onto your plate. A little sort of a bouquet to one side, like that. It will be just perfect like that. If you want to take it a step further, a few little drops of lemon juice, like that. A few little drops of olive oil, like that. And then the tiniest little pinch of Parmesan cheese. I mean, just as if you were putting salt and pepper on it. Well, maybe not pepper, salt. Straight to the table with that. Really delicious, healthy, nutritious, quite stylish, lovely plate of fish and a delicious green vegetable. Most people like ice cream or iced desserts, and without doubt, it's worth making your own. An ice cream machine is a luxury, and whereas I would not be without mine, I can honestly say you could have a lifetime of great ice cream if you don't have one. There are a number of different techniques for making ice cream, and the version I'm going to make today is an egg mousse based one. And you don't need an ice cream machine to freeze it. This technique makes the smoothest and most tender of all of these iced creams and offers cooks so many choices when it comes to flavor additions. This is a classic. The flavor I'm adding to the ice cream today is praline, a blend of caramelized nuts. Put the almonds and the sugar into a low-sided pan and heat gently. Stir occasionally to prevent them from sticking. No liquid is added, so you just have to be patient and wait for the sugar to melt. Sometimes I move the saucepan around to get everything to melt evenly. Allow the sugar to continue to caramelize to a rich color, stirring it as you go. And then pour all of that into a tin lined with parchment paper. It's dangerously hot, so be careful here. Leave this to cool completely, and then break it up and put it into a food processor and render it to a coarse grit. The machine will shake a bit and it will be noisy. It's pretty hard stuff. What you're after is a texture like this with some larger pieces of caramelized almond remaining in the mixture. So the first thing to do when you're making the ice cream is to make a syrup. And we're going to make a thick syrup and we're going to cook it to what's called the thread stage. So when I pick up some syrup on my spoon, it's going to fall back into saucepan in a thick, heavy, noticeable thread. So it's pretty straightforward. Once you do it once, you'll know it forever. So add in the sugar and the water, and then we'll just start those off on a lowish heat. I want to make sure that the sugar dissolves before the water comes to the boil. That's the ideal situation. So give it a few stirs to start off with, just to get it going. I don't like to leave the spoon sitting in the saucepan, so I just sort of leave it sitting on the side there. You don't need to cook the wooden spoon. It doesn't bring any flavor to the ice cream. The other thing you can be doing while your sugar and water is cooking to the syrup is just get your egg yolks beaten so they're ready, because once the syrup reaches the thread stage, you need to act immediately. We'll just pour it in, and then the egg yolk and that thick syrup will beat up to a thick, heavy mousse, and that's what protects the cream in the ice cream. And speaking of the cream, I have my cream here ready, just very, very softly whipped. Don't over whip it, and this is pure cream. So just keep giving the sugar and the water just the odd stir. You don't need to stir it continuously. And the stirring at this stage is just to encourage the sugar to dissolve. If the sugar doesn't dissolve before the water comes to the boil, sometimes you get little crystals. Again, not the end of the world, but better if you can avoid that. Okay, so the sugar has completely dissolved. So now you can get rid of the wooden spoon. There's no advantage to using the wooden spoon any further. In fact, it's not a good idea. So just take that out of there, and we're going to allow that to continue cooking until when we dip a spoon into the syrup, it's going to fall in a thick thread. As you can see at the moment, it just looks almost like water or a very thin syrup. We need those little drops that are falling off now to move in slow, thick, thread-like form. So syrup's been cooking away, and now, as you can see, it's falling off the spoon more slowly, and you see that obvious thread like that. That is perfect. Now, my egg yolks have already been whisking, so turn them on. It's absolutely crucial that the eggs are whisking when you pour the syrup in, otherwise it just sits there and solidifies immediately. And I like to pour the syrup so that it hits the side of the bowl rather than the whisk. If the syrup hits the whisk, it goes all around the edge of the bowl and stays there, gets cold and stays there. Where if you pour it down the side in a single sort of drizzle, it all ends up in the actual mousse. Perfect. And now we let that whisk up to a good thick mousse. That's the thick mousse that's going to prevent the cream from crystallizing. Now, I have a lovely thick mousse, pale in color, Much thicker than it was when we just poured the syrup onto the egg yolks. That's perfect for protecting the cream. So I'm putting in for this recipe 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And I can also fold in my softly whipped cream. And I'm folding in the cream with a spatula. I'm not adding the cream in with the whisk while the machine is running, because that can actually spoil the texture as well. So just fold in nice and gently like that. And you want it to come back to a single colour, because if you leave any little bits of cream unfolded in, they just freeze as frozen cream, unflavoured. And honestly, that's just not any good to eat. That's nearly there now. So not looking streaky, all folded through. Sometimes just when you think it's there, you give it one more stir, and then suddenly there's a rogue streak of the thicker mousse. I think I'm very happy with that now. So now I'm ready to freeze it. And one of the advantages of this ice cream, apart from the fact that it's utterly delicious, is you do not need an ice cream machine. So straight into a container to freeze. And I like to put it into a container I can cover in the freezer so it doesn't get what's called freezer burn, because that just, spoils it slightly. Every last little bit. It's precious stuff, this. I like to spread it out. It freezes more quickly when it's less thickly distributed like that. Lid on, and then straight into the freezer. Lovely. Okay, so my vanilla ice cream is not completely frozen through, but frozen to the point where I can now add in my praline. If I put the praline powder in just after I made it, before it was frozen, I'm afraid all the praline just goes straight to the bottom and it won't be evenly distributed. So sprinkle it on like that. I'm going to save a little for sprinkling on the ice cream that I've already frozen. So just cut it in like that. And somebody described the texture of this ice cream as being similar to crushed velvet, which may not sound great on first hearing, but actually it's a good way of describing what the texture is like. And then we're just going to put this back into the freezer to freeze it. And as soon as it's frozen, it's ready to eat. Smooth it down, and you're likely to get less sort of ice crystals, because there's less area for the ice to sort of set and grip. Lovely. So I'm going to put that into the freezer to freeze. That will be really wonderful. Now, I've got one that I've already frozen. So you can scoop the ice cream with a spoon, or I've got an ice cream scoop. I sometimes serve the ice cream on its own, mostly really, but I like fresh fruit with it sometimes as well. So I have a little Irish strawberry, blueberry and raspberry in here, which I've sprinkled very lightly with a little bit of sugar, just to lift the flavour of the fruit. And with ice cream, just, some people will want 2 scoops, some people will want 1. You'll know your audience. So a scoop, like that. The slight bitterness of the caramel counteracts the sugar in this, which also is really, really good. So you could absolutely just take them to the table like that, or if you want to, you can sprinkle on a little fruit, just round and about, lightens the experience, makes it all delicious. You could, of course, just sprinkle on a little praline powder, like that. And then if you have a little mint leaf or a lemon balm leaf or a verbena leaf or something like that handy, you can just complete the picture like that. So the technique is very straightforward. I have to say, whenever I serve this, it always gets a terrific response. People love it. This is truly ice cream.